Paris, July 9th, 1971. A dispatch over the newswire. James Douglas Morrison, the singer of The Doors, died 6 days ago, on Saturday, July 3rd, of a heart attack at the age of 27. A legend had died. A myth was born. The Doors, one of the most famous groups of the 1960s. It's here at the Whiskey A Go-Go, the rock temple of Los Angeles, where Jim Morrison was first discovered.
This is where I first saw Jim Morrison and the Doors. I was producing concerts in San Francisco and LA and different places, and he had just started to play locally in town, and the Doors had opened here at the Whiskey, and people kept saying to me, you ought to see this band, they're really good. And so I came down and I saw the Doors, and I was floored immediately.
The rock revolution. We want the world and we want it now, he loudly proclaimed. Morrison, the provocateur, living god of America's rebellious youth. Morrison, the symbol of a generation.
It really had to do with breaking away from the establishment and setting new horizons and new goals and new ways of doing things and new ways of approaching things.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah.
Morrison was called the Dionysus of rock because of his cathartic live performances, but there was another side to the man with the angelic features. He was drowning himself in drugs and alcohol, slowly wasting away. In 1969, after years of abusing bourbon and controlled substances, he causes a scandal in Miami. Accused of engaged in obscene behavior on stage, he's arrested and taken to court, and the group is banned from giving concerts. 1971, Morrison's image as a rock star becomes more and more oppressive. He leaves the United States to follow in the footsteps of his two masters, Rimbaud and Baudelaire. Most of all, he says he wants to write. He moves to Paris with his girlfriend, Pamela Curson, and frequents a small group of friends.
It was really written on his face. His features were haggard and wasted. He was, there was a war going on inside him. There was definitely something wrong.
Morrison's drug of choice, in fact, was alcohol. Even though it was not a hip drug at the time, it was even looked down upon. With other members of the Doors, he had tried everything, acid, whatever. It was the heyday of drugs. But he was essentially a drinker. I would even say he was an alcoholic. In Paris, Morrison drank more and more heavily and tried to exorcise his self-loathing in places like the hip Paris Club of the time, a discotheque on the Rue de Seine, the rock and roll circus. The club was the place to be every night, and it lasted for about a year. It was a special magic moment, the hippie psychedelic period. It was, let's say, very Indian, with lots of incense, everyone wearing Indian shirts, everyone smoked a lot of hash, and American and British stars would come in, Hendrix, Mick Jagger. And in a corner, 3 or 4 times I saw him, maybe 3 times, Jim Morrison just sitting there, always alone. And that's what's crazy. He was running away from something. It was obvious. He was obviously running away from the myth of the rock star, which apparently was something he was never interested in. But it's not through drinking, taking drugs, being completely drunk, that things get better. Friday, July 2nd, 1971. The last night of Jim Morrison's life, 9 p.m., Rue Beautreilly in Paris. That night he had dinner in a nearby cafe. Pamela was not with him. The night before, he had drunk himself into a stupor, once again at the club, the Rock and Roll Circus. Jim Morrison didn't stay for long in the club. He was always a little slumped like this, and when I saw him leave, I must have followed him out about 15 minutes later. There's a long passage outside the club. I don't remember that well, but if I remember correctly, there's a long passage that goes under a building and out onto a street in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. I'm not sure if it's the Rue de Seine or the Rue de Mazarine. And when I came out of the club, I saw him just slumped on the ground. And here I was, a music journalist, crazy about rock, and seeing Morrison was a real thrill, and at the same time, It made me really sad to see this guy completely drunk there lying in the gutter. When you're 25 years old and a little cocky like I was, well, I picked Jim Morrison up out of the gutter. It's sad to say but true that the next day I was very proud to tell my friends that I'd carried Jim Morrison to his car. Around 10 p.m., Jim leaves the cafe and goes back to the apartment to get Pamela. They've known each other since the early days of the Doors. She's 25, he's 27, and they're constantly breaking up and then getting back together. In Paris, they're on a honeymoon again. That night, the couple went to the movies to see a classic Western, Raoul Walsh's Pursued, starring Robert Mitchum. At 1 in the morning, on July 3rd, Jim and Pam go back to the apartment. It's been a quiet evening. The couple listen to some music before going to bed around 2:30 a.m. Waking up at 8 a.m., Pamela finds Jim's inanimate body in the bathtub. Later, she will declare to the police that at 3:30 a.m., Jim was already dying.
I was wakened by the sound of my friend's breathing. I had the impression he was suffocating. I asked him if there was something wrong. I wanted to call a doctor, but he said it wasn't necessary and that after a hot bath he'd feel better. Oh, then he started vomiting. I think it was blood. Then he felt better. He got some color back in his cheeks. So I no longer worried. I went back to bed, and around 8 a.m., when I woke up, I found him inanimate.
It's not until 9 a.m. that she calls for an ambulance. On the morning of Saturday, July 3rd, 1971, we were given a call to go to 17 Rue Beautreilly, where someone had had an attack. We got there around 9:22, 9:23 a.m. So when we got there, my men and I, we all went upstairs. A young woman opened the door and then took us to the bathroom. And in the bathtub, we found a rather heavy-set man, yes, just lying in the bathtub. The death is recorded officially that same day at the City Hall of the 4th Arrondissement in Paris. Time of death, 5 a.m. There's no autopsy. The medical examiner concluded a death by natural causes, a heart attack after congestion of the lungs. 2 days later, July 5th, the American embassy is notified that he will be buried on the 7th in Père-Lachaise Cemetery in the strictest privacy. The press is only informed on the 9th, 6 days later. A still unsolved mystery. On that same July 3rd night, although no one normally knows the news, at the other end of Paris, a DJ learns about Morrison's death from two strangers. So here I was with my records. There was a little bubble here because the club is called The Bubble. There was a door there and two guys come in, two young guys, guys like us. I don't even remember their names. I mean, they weren't friends, just guys I knew. So I'm playing my records, I'm standing like this, and one of the two guys says, he says, you know, we just heard someone just told us that Jim Morrison is dead. So I said, what do you mean he's dead? Yes, he's dead. Jim Morrison is dead. It was 5:30 in the morning. What's even more troubling is that although Pam declares to the police that they hadn't gone out that night, Morrison is definitely seen at the Rock and Roll Circus. The discotheque is now called the Whiskey A Go-Go, the name of the club in Los Angeles where the Doors get their start. When I saw him come in, he was alone, and then after a while he left. There were a lot of people there. He was looking for some people over there near the dance floor. There were tables around the dance floor. I think he was looking for friends, and then he went up to some people I'd seen once or twice in the club and sat down with them. You could tell what time it was by the kind of people that came in. People who come in at midnight, people who come in at 3 in the morning. So he came in sometime between 1 and 2 a.m., but I didn't look at my watch. He didn't stay for very long that night, not very long, but he was here. Then they came to get me at the bar because someone had locked himself in the toilets and they couldn't get the door open. The toilets of the Rock and Roll Circus were on the first floor near the cloakroom. So I went to the toilets and there was nothing unusual, and I said, "So what? It's over. You've handled the problem." And they told me, "No, not here, but next door. Next door was the Alcazar, because the 2 nightclubs belonged to Paul Passini at the time. So there was a communicating door, and the clients of the Alcazar and the clients of the Rock and Roll Circus could easily go from one club to the other." So I went, and I was told that they'd found a guy unconscious and that they'd carried him out of the Alcazar into the Rue Mazarine. Was it Jim Morrison who had fallen down unconscious that night in the toilets of the Alcazar? That's the thesis of one of his Paris friends, Hervé Muller. Jim Morrison took a line of heroin, perhaps for the first time in his life, that night at the Rock and Roll Circus. He lapsed into a coma. The 2 people with him, a man and a woman, took him through to the Alcazar next door, so as not to go out the exit to the Rue de Seine. So they came out on the Rue Mazarine. They put him into a car or a taxi, and they went back to the apartment on the Rue Beautreilly. He was probably still alive then, which explains the bathtub. When someone has an overdose, you give him a cold bath, a cold shower. You absolutely have to keep him awake. But there was the mix of heroin and alcohol, and that was fatal. Contrary to the official version, several hours before his death, he was in the Rock and Roll Circus. A few days later, 2 or 3, I can't tell you exactly, I went back to the Rock and Roll Circus. And there, everyone knew. It was public knowledge. But I can't confirm it. I didn't see it. But anyway, everyone was saying it the next day. He had died there, in the toilets. Still makes me feel sad to think about it. Drugs or not. Drugs, fatigue. In any case, it was a sort of suicide.
People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted.
Only Pamela Curson knew what had really happened that night, the night a legendary rock star suddenly became a myth. Pamela Curson died of a heroin overdose in 1974, 3 years after the death of Jim Morrison.
No one remembers your name when you're strange, when you're strange.